Only 4 episodes in, and we're already at one of the best episodes of the series. Episode 4, Walkabout, really defines what a great episode of Lost can and should look like. It leans into an urgent dilemma affecting everyone, in this case the group's need to find a food source. It reveals some backstory about a main character that throws some curveballs at the audience, and either subverts or enriches our perceptions of who that person is. It climaxes with a jaw-dropping reveal or twist, and it keeps the mystery engine running with multiple what the hell moments that won't be paid off for quite some time. The general pacing of this episode remains what I would best describe as relaxed. There is a strong sense that everyone is slowly coming to terms with their situation, yet still hoping for and awaiting rescue. The stakes of the show have yet to be elevated beyond the basics of survival, and we remain very much focused on character and group dynamics. The writers have a big cast to play with, and they clearly want to try out different combinations and pairings to see who has the best chemistry. In this case, we get Locke, Kate and Michael venturing into the jungle together. While Locke will have many future jungle adventures with Kate, and several more prominent entanglements with Michael, we don't really see much going on between Kate and Michael going forward, and these three as a trio never go out on a mission together again. We see our first real pairing up of Charlie and Hurley here, as they try to fish for their supper to impress Shannon. The writers again testing out character combinations, and in this case, the combination is here to stay. Charlie and Hurley will go on to form a very strong bond and friendship. It's nice to have a scene that establishes their first meaningful interaction as a duo, and to see how their bromance begins, with them helping one another out whilst maintaining a good sense of humour in the face of adversity. Their friendship is one of the most consistent on-island relationships either of them ever has. The most fascinating aspect of this episode for me is the contrast between past and present versions of John Locke, and how we come to question his present-day abilities in light of seeing the person he was before the crash. This dichotomy is what brings the intrigue and tension to what amounts to a rather simple storyline of trying to hunt and catch a boar for food. All of the substance to this episode lies in between the lines, the unsaid, the implied, and the unseen. Walkabout sets the gold standard for future episode formulas to come, and was certainly the one that got me hooked into the show. In fact, I'm pretty sure this was the gateway drug for many people. It's often cited as the episode that new viewers should wait to reach before making a judgment call on whether or not they should continue watching the whole show. The pilot and tabula rasa don't always grip everyone, whereas Walkabout turns the premise on its head by revealing that not only is there more going on to this drama than simply survival situations on an island, but that the island these characters have crashed upon is going to be a character and a larger overarching mystery in and of itself. That climactic moment that reveals Locke was in a wheelchair prior to the crash, and the hard cut to his awakening on the island, realising he has been made whole again, almost moved me to tears the first time I saw it, and I have carried that almost indescribable feeling of awe with me ever since. It's easily one of the finest and most memorable moments in the entire series. No doubt helped by Michael Giacchino's incredible musical score, which defines the heart-wrenching tragedy of John Locke's life, his physical and psychological struggle, yet also so elegantly captures the magical elation of his rebirth on the island. This piece quite rightly becomes the primary theme to accompany Locke throughout the rest of the series, as he oscillates between the man he once was and the man he is now transformed into, and it's one of my favourite Giacchino compositions. And with this soul-stirring revelation, Walkabout announces Lost as a genre show. There has been much said and written about how audiences were turned off from Lost over time because it moved away from the more grounded survival drama and leaned too much into the supernatural and the mystical, that it somehow betrayed its humble beginnings. While I might agree that the show evolved beyond the simplicity of the first season, I challenge the criticism that the show shifted gears into the supernatural without any warning. The series established very early on, in this very episode in fact, that we were not in Kansas anymore, and Locke's physical transformation would not have been easy to explain away in real-world terms. And that is why we love Lost. Not because it follows the rules of conventional television or our conventional flesh and blood world, but because it dares to make the impossible absolutely possible. Whenever someone makes the argument that Lost betrayed the audience with moving islands and ghosts and the afterlife, I always point to Walkabout and its follow-up episode White Rabbit as examples of how the magic was there from the very start. It's just that the show had to slowly walk first before the rest of it could run. And right off the bat, Terry O'Quinn is firing on all cylinders as John Locke. He's been playing the man with a high degree of ambiguity up until now, and it isn't until there is more light shed on his backstory that he gets a proper foothold into how to play the various shades of the character. I think everyone was expecting Locke to turn out to be either some military man, perhaps due to O'Quinn's history of playing men of authority in movies, or a psychopath, also something O'Quinn had been known for playing. The early scenes of Walkabout play up the idea that Locke is some kind of can-do-anything badass. No one expected Locke to turn out to be a lowly office drone who is into board games and role-playing fantasies. It's such a wonderful subversion and reversal on what we expected this character to be, and O'Quinn captures both the cool confidence of a man who pretends to know what he is doing, as well as the insecure desperation of a man trying and failing to be someone else. He is constantly being told by people around him what he cannot do.
John, you can't!
Don't tell me what I can't do.
Which drives him even further into trying to prove them wrong, and it makes us root for him to succeed, because who hasn't felt undervalued or underestimated in their life at some point? There is so much nuance and complexity to Locke in just this one episode. Also, can we all just stop and take a moment to acknowledge just how much of a prick Randy Nations is? Locke might be a little bit sad and deluded, but he seems like such a harmless, affable guy, and the fact that he is also in a wheelchair makes Randy's bullying of him all the more egregious and nasty. He's one of the more understated flashback villains of the series, alongside Susan Porter. Randy represents that all-too-human villainy, the petty bureaucrat, and for those who have never noticed before, Randy was also Hurley's boss at Mr. Cluck's, where he behaved in a similarly spiteful manner.
What, is that a problem, Reyes?
The writer of this episode, David Fury, deservedly received an Emmy nomination for his work, and would later go on to write a couple of other mythological milestones for Season 1, including the Saeed-centric episode Solitary, which introduced Danielle Rousseau, The Others, The Whispers, and The Sickness as plot elements. And then he would go on to pen the Hurley-centric episode Numbers, which famously establishes the iconic sequence of numbers from the series that have endured long past its series finale. Fury is absolutely an instrumental player in establishing the show's voice early on, and I always wish that he had been kept around for longer. While he fills in some of Locke's immediate backstory and paints the man as a rather lonely figure who has reinvented himself on the island as the hunter-explorer he always fantasised about being, Fury leaves enough blank spaces surrounding Locke that we have to question the man's intentions and motivations throughout, which is compounded by some of the man's decisions later on in the season. I think the writer's room was still in two minds as to whether or not John Locke would eventually become a more antagonistic figure to the group, a sort of big bad in the making. And while we definitely see conflicts flare up as a result of his future actions, he becomes more of a divisive figure rather than an out-and-out hero or villain. Across the next 5 seasons, Locke's arc gradually becomes a fascinating, frustrating, and ultimately tragic study in the follies of blind faith. Faith itself can be a very powerful thing to those who believe, but blind faith can be a very dangerous road to travel, yet Locke travels it willingly, leading him to commit acts of violence in the name of his beliefs. He becomes capable of doing almost anything in order to demonstrate his commitment to the island, while other characters with ulterior motives help him to fill in the blanks. The man in black claims to speak on behalf of Jacob, and by extension the island, and Locke just accepts this, which allows this mysterious stranger to tell him what to do, even when what he is telling him to do goes against every instinct that Locke might have, such as sacrificing himself for the greater good.
Richard said I was going to die.
Well, I suppose that's why they call it sacrifice.
That's the power of belief. After the hatch implosion eradicates his doubt and reaffirms his faith, Locke goes all in and becomes an island zealot, more than suited to being a potential leader for the others, willing to both kill and die for the island, even when he doesn't actually know the reasons why. Over the course of the show, we will see him misinterpret instructions and follow false prophets promising him the answers that he seeks, and this error in judgment is what ultimately leads to his demise. And all of the seeds for this arc are sown in Walkabout. Locke is one of the most fully realised and complicated characters in Lost. He was actually the first character to truly compel me in the series. Here was this man with this amazing secret about himself, who seemed to be at peace with this awful situation the other survivors found themselves in. We don't fully understand his motives for a long time, but he somehow always has the perfect insight into each situation and character that he encounters. At least that is how Locke is on the island. His flashbacks always tell a different story. He's a sad man. And I don't mean that as a pejorative like some other people do. I mean that the man is an emotional wreck. He is meek and lonely and has suffered throughout his life. And he's a bit of a fantasist as a result, who escapes through playing games and imagines himself as someone more impressive than he truly is.
Line secure GL-12, go ahead.
Target area is acquired. Maneuvers are a go for 1300 hours. Repeat, we are a go.
Roger that. We'll convene at the usual rendezvous point at 1300 hours.
I think many of us can actually relate to Locke's humdrum mediocrity and loneliness, and his dreams of being a somebody someday. His desire is to be special, part of something greater than the sum of his miserable life. And his crash landing on the island appears to have been the making of him. We want him to succeed as a result, because in a way, if Locke's life can add up to something truly meaningful, then anyone's life can. He's also an audience proxy in many ways throughout the series, because we primarily explore the mysteries of the island through him. Unlike the other characters, he's actually actively interested in pulling back the curtain and figuring out what the hell is going on. And if you are one of the Lost viewers who was most interested in the mythology, then Locke was the only main character who was making it his mission to learn as much about the island history as possible. It is through him that we uncover some of the biggest revelations of the series. I remember always anticipating whenever there was a Locke-centric episode on the docket, because I knew that the mythology would invariably take a step forward with him. His trajectory was deeply entwined with the mythology. So people identified with Locke's sense of anger and the unfairness of his suffering. They related to his dreams of being special and important, and perhaps lived vicariously through his rebirth and becoming on the island as this wise shamanistic figure, a man of knowledge who commands respect and reverence, the kind of person many people would like to become in their own lives in some way. I think this early connection to the character is what allowed many of us to forgive Locke's more selfish impulses later on. He didn't want to lose his miracle or his sense of specialness, and constantly needed to reaffirm his faith. And this led him into many dangerous situations, as well as placing others in harm's way. As a result of Locke being this audience surrogate who some of us perhaps over-identified with, it was difficult to watch where his character was ultimately taken later on. And I think that is the double-edged sword of making an ensemble, character-driven show. Every episode made a different character into the lead. They became the protagonist and we would see the island through their eyes. But as the show went on, it became clearer and clearer that Jack Shepherd was ultimately the main protagonist, and everyone else was almost fulfilling supporting roles around him in some ways. Kate as the romantic interest, Sawyer as his romantic rival, Saeed as his second-in-command, Hurley as his sidekick, and Locke as his ideological opposite, but also his mentor. And if you know how stories work, then you'll know that the mentor figure must always die in order for the protagonist to grow and become the hero they need to be. And that was basically Locke's primary narrative function going forward within the story, to be a counterpoint to Jack, and essentially teach and inspire him to become a leader, then later, a believer. All these years later, Walkabout is still a delightful standalone watch that sets up multiple foundational plot elements and ideas that will continue to pay off for many seasons to come. As far as I'm concerned, the show really gets started here, with John Locke becoming our guide into unlocking the mysteries of the island, no matter what the cost. For such an early episode in the show's run, a lot of groundwork is laid for some of the bigger mythological milestones to come. Why was Locke in a wheelchair? After years of trials and tribulations with his abusive father Anthony Cooper, including being conned out of a kidney, Locke had reached the end of his rope, so to speak. He became determined to prevent Cooper from ever harming others in the same way again. Following this confrontation, Cooper pushed Locke out of a window, and Locke fell 8 stories before hitting the ground. The only reason he didn't die that day was because Jacob touched him and activated the power of the light within. Why was Locke on a walkabout in the first place? It seems naive of Locke to think he would have been able to go on this outback adventure without disclosing his disability, but he had convinced himself that it would be the experience he needed to give some true purpose and meaning to all of his suffering, that he would have overcome the pain of the past and maybe finally find acceptance in who he was now. However, it's worth noting that the idea of a walkabout itself was actually planted in his mind by Matthew Abaddon, who was an orderly during Locke's rehabilitation period at the hospital. Abaddon worked for Charles Widmore, who was well aware of Locke's destiny on the island and his time travel to come, and Widmore instructed Abaddon to keep a watchful eye over the man. Abaddon's job was to get Locke to where he needed to be, and that was giving the man a physical and spiritual goal to aim for, and a reason to travel to Australia someday. How did the island heal John Locke? At the heart of the island is a core of energy with electromagnetic properties that has the ability to heal injuries, illnesses, and ailments, most of which can be repaired simply by being in close proximity to the light. When channeled through water, the light exerts concentrated healing properties. This light-infused water can reverse your potentially fatal injuries to a prior state in time before you had those injuries. It regenerates damaged tissue and cells. However, for someone with a catastrophic injury such as Locke, who has been paralysed for 4 years with a long-term spinal cord break, it is still an unusual occurrence even for this place. One of the island's longest residents, Richard Alpert, later comments that this kind of healing can only happen to someone very special, someone who the island needs.
Because when word got back here that there was a man with a broken spine on the plane who could suddenly walk again, well, people here began to get very excited because that could only happen to someone who was extremely special.
We later discover that John Locke does indeed have a very specific destiny to fulfill in both the present-day timeline, but more crucially, in the island's past, and he needs to be able to walk in both. This goes towards the time loop paradox at the heart of Lost, which dictates many events and necessities. If time-travelling Locke was walking around in 1954, as Richard Alpert remembers seeing him do, then the man had to be able to walk again in 2004 before going back in time. Furthermore, Locke could not have been the man that he was, who makes the decisions that he does, unless he had suffered at the hands of his father and been in that wheelchair for years beforehand, which also dictated that his kidney needed to be stolen, because that will be the only reason he survives Ben's gunshot wound later in life. His failures are as crucial as his successes, and his past suffering is vital so that he can thrive on the island. And so Locke is healed by the island's energy so that he can fulfill his cyclical destiny. What did Locke see when he encountered the monster? Well, John claims in the following episode White Rabbit that he looked into the eye of the island and what he saw was beautiful. Then later in season 3 episode The Cost of Living, he elaborates that he saw a very bright light. I'm going to explore this more under the constants and variables section, since this speaks to notions of character perceptions and interpretations. We'll come back to this in a bit. Why does Locke lie about the monster?
So that thing, the monster, whatever, she said it was headed right towards you. Did you see anything? Get any kind of look at it?
No.
Following Tabula Rasa, this is another episode that sees the continuation of an ongoing Lost trope that we will become all too familiar with, in which a character with important knowledge decides to keep a revelation to themselves. In this case, Locke pretends to not have encountered or seen the monster in the jungle. He straight up lies to Michael. Now, his reasoning for this is never really revealed, but we do learn that Locke has actually misunderstood the nature of the monster and views it as a benign presence, the soul of the island, if you will, and maybe even the entity that's responsible for healing his paralysis. He also views himself as being special, that the island had chosen to reveal itself to him and him alone. This drives both his secrecy and the need to reaffirm his faith whenever and wherever he can. Why doesn't Locke tell more people about his miracle? Despite his seemingly perplexing decisions, Locke is not a stupid man. He is ready and willing to believe that the island is a place where miracles happen, a belief that has been definitively validated by his own miraculous healing, and he explains this to both Jack and Boone later in separate conversations. He reasons that the other survivors won't know how to deal with such knowledge. In fact, they are more likely to reject the truth than embrace it, which we see Jack do quite emphatically later on.
I don't believe in destiny.
If Locke told everyone that he was paralysed for 4 years and could suddenly walk again after the crash, would anyone really believe him, or would they write him off as a crazy man or even a con artist? Even after multiple characters see some pretty unbelievable and impossible things in this place, Locke is still getting called crazy several seasons later.
Because he was crazy too, Jack. You said so yourself.
Well, maybe I was wrong.
No, you were right.
So, I think he was right not to force others to believe, because that's the thing with miracles. You can't really be told about them, you have to experience them for yourself. Who is the apparition that Jack keeps seeing on the beach? We'll get into this mystery in more detail in the next episode, because there's quite a bit to discuss there. At first we are led to believe that it's the ghost of Jack's recently deceased father, Christian Shepherd, but in actuality it is the man in black, taking on the guise of Christian to trick and lure away Jack from the beach and the other survivors. Or is there something else going on here? Watch the next video to find out my thoughts on that. Walkabout continues the motif of the pilot episode by beginning on an eye-opening. This is something that we will see happen throughout Season 1 as an episode commences, and several more times throughout the series. The intention behind starting episodes like this is to convey the idea that we will be viewing the following events primarily from the point of view of this character, both in terms of on-island storyline and the flashbacks to the past. One of the sub-themes of Lost is about perception and perspective, and how different characters look at the same event yet see different things. This can also involve rewinding to a certain moment in time and seeing it play out from a new angle. In the pilot we saw the crash from Jack's perspective, now we are seeing it from Locke's. Later we will get another view on the crash from the perspective of everyone's favourite characters, Nikki and Paolo. Anyway, this shift in point of view and perception is echoed throughout the narrative, which brings me back around to Locke and Echo, and how when Locke encountered the monster in the jungle for the first time, we're not privy to what he is seeing, but he later tells Mr. Echo,
What exactly did you see back there? I saw it once, you know.
What did you see?
I saw a very bright light. It was beautiful.
That is not what I saw.
Well, we know what Mr. Echo saw because it's on film. He looked into the eye of the smoke monster and saw what he later describes as the devil, but due to the strength of his religious convictions, he was not afraid of it, at least during that encounter. Whereas Locke describes seeing a very bright light. So why the discrepancy? Well, this question is actually answered later in Season 3 in the episode Left Behind. The monster scans its target, and a bright, blinding flash judders out from within the cloud. Juliet is blinded by it. We also see Richard Alpert forced to close his eyes to shield from the strength of the glare. And this is what Locke sees. He is blinded by the light within the smoke cloud, mistaking it to be something beautiful and benign. But he doesn't realise that the smoke monster has effectively scanned him and downloaded his entire life. Mr. Echo saw the smoke monster for what it was. Locke saw what he wanted to see. Throughout Lost, there are many references to games, mostly of the board game variety. Locke is seen playing various board games across the series in different circumstances. He finds escapism and great comfort in them, which might stem from an early age, and he goes on to treat a lot of his experiences on the island as if he were the main player in a game. This motif takes on a literal meaning in the show's narrative, as we eventually discover that many of the events that occur are part of an existential chess game being played out between Jacob and the man in black, with very real stakes and consequences. So Locke wasn't entirely wrong for approaching situations in this way. They were all players in a game, they just didn't know what the game was for a long time. Locke's knife throwing is established here, as he surprises just about everyone with his nearly fatal accuracy. This ability of his will return again and again, at first as a way to demonstrate his increasing skill level and his eagerness to teach it to others, and gradually him becoming deadlier and deadlier with each throw. We'll get into some of the physics of the knife throwing when we get to Michael and Walt's episode special. As a cool bit of behind the scenes trivia, Terry O'Quinn really learned how to throw knives like this, and there is a great featurette on the Season 3 DVD of him demonstrating his skill with the blade. We will see many future references to knives in the series, some of which have a mystical significance to the mythology. In Walkabout, we spend our first real piece of quality time with Rose Nadler, a recurring guest character who becomes a sort of den mother to the group, frequently offering advice and comfort, and even some stern choice words to whoever needs it. Rose is kind of an interesting counterpoint to Locke because, while we don't know it yet, she has also experienced a miracle. Her terminal cancer has been healed, and she feels it, which gives her hope that her husband Bernard is alive out there somewhere. Much like Locke, Rose maintains faith that this place is special and is somehow proof of the divine. Later we find out that Rose actually saw Locke in the wheelchair at the airport and is one of the few people who knew his secret. The fact that she sees him walking around the island shortly after really reaffirms her faith that her cancer was gone, and this is why she acts the way that she does in this episode. She is slowly coming to terms with the miracle. Not too dissimilar from how Locke is portrayed in part 1 of the pilot. Rose is definitely a more overtly religious character who prays and believes in God. She provides an interesting contrast to John Locke in that way. Both of them have experienced the island's magic for themselves, both have had their faith rewarded, and both become mentor-like figures to others, yet they deal with their knowledge in very different ways. For Rose, it was enough that she was healed and given a second chance. For Locke, he needs to know why, and proceeds to start digging for answers. Literally. Locke talks about how going on the walkabout is his destiny, something that he's convinced himself of in order to give hope for the future, and he isn't far off. It is his destiny, he just got the destination wrong. But this word destiny will be coming up again and again on the show. In fact, destiny becomes not only a key thematic idea, but also a major plot point. 4 episodes in, and the writers have once again articulated the grand ideas that this show is going to grapple with in the seasons to come.
Norman Croucher. Double amputee, no legs. He climbed to the top of Mount Everest. Why? It was his destiny.
We will find out that Rose is correct and that the tail section survivors are indeed alive and well on the other side of the island, and we will also discover that there are 23 of them, at least to begin with. There are 2 key numbers related to Locke's past that are mentioned in this episode. Locke has a phone relationship with a woman he calls Helen, who it is implied is really an operator on a sex chat line who has developed a non-sexual and friendly rapport with one of her customers. Their conversations had been going on for 8 months before Locke asked her to come with him to Australia. This effectively ended their interactions and made Locke realise that he had been living in a fantasy. In Season 2, we find out that Helen was the name of the love of his life, a woman who provided some light in the darkness during a difficult period. His relationship with her came to an abrupt end due to his inability to let go of the past. So that means the sex line operator that he strikes up a friendship with was either already named Helen, and that was what made him select her, or he decided to call her by that name. Either way, it seems he was trying to recapture what he had lost with the real Helen. Whilst arguing with the Walkabout tour guide, Locke confirms that he has been in this wheelchair for 4 years.
My condition is not an issue. I've lived with it for 4 years. It's never kept me from doing anything.
So 4 years in the wheelchair, and Jacob's candidate number 4. We don't really see much of his life post-paralysis, beyond what we get in Walkabout and a couple of scenes in the aftermath. What I find striking about Locke in these flashbacks is how much of an upbeat attitude he tries to maintain throughout, even in the face of an office bully, an imaginary relationship imploding, and his naive hope that he might still get onto that bus if he is just reassuring enough. The upbeatness is obviously masking some anger, but it also speaks to the kind of gentleman that Locke was and could have been. Our experiences can totally change and reshape who we are. They can make or unmake us, and sometimes, under the right circumstances, remake us in a new image. Locke becomes the person he always wanted to be, without ever losing the core of who he was, and that will be enough to fulfill and sustain him. For a while, at least. Join me for the next episode guide, where I'll be breaking down and explaining White Rabbit and diving headfirst into those daddy issues. Please like, share and subscribe to keep this channel alive. Consider donating to my Patreon if you'd like to see me make more videos just like this one. Thank you for watching. See you back on the island.
No.